Santorini was a small, beautiful island in the middle of the Aegean Sea. The sun shone brightly in the clear blue sky, and the sea sparkled like a million tiny diamonds. White houses with blue roofs stood on the cliffs, overlooking the deep blue water. Narrow stone streets wound through the villages, filled with the smell of fresh bread and blooming flowers. People on the island lived a peaceful life. Fishermen woke up early to sail their boats and bring back fresh fish. Farmers took care of their vineyards and olive trees, enjoying the warm sunshine. Children played in the streets, laughing and chasing each other. In the evenings, families and friends gathered in small cafes to share stories and enjoy delicious Greek food. Tourists loved Santorini. They came from all over the world to see the island's famous sunsets. Every evening, people gathered at the top of the cliffs to watch the sun slowly disappear into the sea, painting the sky with orange, pink, and purple. Many visitors said it was the most beautiful sunset they had ever seen. But beneath this peaceful paradise, something powerful and dangerous was sleeping. Santorini was not just an ordinary island, it was a volcano. Long ago, the island had been created by a great eruption. Though it looked calm now, the earth beneath it was always moving. Scientists often studied the island, watching for signs of activity. Most of the time, nothing happened. The people of Santorini knew about the island's history, but they did not worry. They had lived here for generations, and life had always been peaceful. But one day, something changed. One morning, Nikos, a fisherman, stood by the harbor fixing his fishing net. The sun was rising, painting the sky with soft golden light. Everything seemed peaceful, until Nikos felt the ground move beneath his feet. It was a small shake, almost like a large truck passing by. He looked around. The boats in the harbor swayed slightly, and the water made small ripples. "That's strange," he muttered to himself. At a nearby cafe, an old woman named Eleni was having her morning coffee. She felt the tremor too, but simply smiled. "Just the earth stretching," she said to the waiter. "We live on a volcano. It's normal." The waiter nodded and continued serving customers. At first, no one worried. Small tremors happened sometimes, they were just part of life on Santorini. But over the next few days, the shaking became more frequent. Glasses rattled on tables, pictures on walls tilted, and sometimes the water in the harbor moved without any wind. In the school, children giggled when their desks wobbled. "It's like riding a horse." One boy laughed. But the teachers were not laughing. They looked at each other with concern. Meanwhile, at the island's small research station, a group of scientists was busy checking their instruments. Dr. Andreas, a geologist, frowned at the data. The machines showed unusual activity beneath the island. The tremors were not stopping, they were getting stronger. "This is not normal," he said to his assistant. "The earth is waking up." He knew what this could mean. Sometimes, small tremors came and went without causing harm. But sometimes they were a warning, a sign that a big earthquake or even a volcanic eruption could happen. Dr. Andreas picked up his phone. It was time to call the authorities. The island needed to be prepared. But outside, people still walked along the streets enjoying the sunshine. Tourists took photos, children played, and fishermen prepared their boats. No one knew that their peaceful island might soon change forever. The tremors did not stop. Instead, they became stronger. At first, the shaking lasted only a few seconds, but now it continued for longer. People could feel it under their feet when they walked. The walls of houses trembled, and sometimes, small stones fell from the cliffs into the sea. One afternoon, a strong tremor hit the island. Eleni was in her kitchen, preparing lunch. Suddenly, her plates and cups began to rattle. One plate slid off the table and smashed on the floor. She gasped and grabbed the counter to keep her balance. In the harbor, Nikos was tying his boat when the ground shook again. This time, the water in the sea moved strangely, as if something deep below was stirring. The boats rocked harder than before. That evening, the local government held a meeting in the town square. The mayor, a serious-looking man named Mr. Papadakis, stood in front of the crowd. His voice was calm, but his eyes were worried. "We all feel the shaking," he said. "The scientists tell us that the island is not safe right now. We must be careful." People in the crowd murmured to each other. Some looked frightened, others uncertain. What should we do? A woman asked. For now, schools will be closed, the mayor continued. No one should go near the cliffs. If the situation gets worse, we may have to leave the island. A silence fell over the crowd. Leave the island? Their home? Many people had lived here for generations. Their families, their work, their memories. Everything was here. That night, some families made a difficult decision. They packed their bags, locked their houses, and left for the mainland. The ferries to Athens were full of people carrying suitcases and holding their children's hands tightly. But many others stayed. I was born here, Nikos told his wife. I will not leave so easily. Eleni also stayed. She had lived on Santorini for 80 years. I will not run away, she said. The island and I will face this together. Still, fear grew in the hearts of those who remained. Every tremor was a reminder that something deep beneath the island was changing, and no one knew what would happen next. The island was no longer as lively as before. Many people had left, and the streets were quieter. Some shops were closed, and the cafes had fewer customers. But those who stayed knew they had to help each other. Eleni, the old woman, noticed that her neighbor, Maria, had no more food. Maria was a widow who lived alone. With the ferries full and shops closing early, she had not been able to buy enough supplies. Eleni knocked on Maria's door and smiled. I made some extra bread today, she said, and I have some olives and cheese. Let's eat together. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. I was so worried. At the harbor, Nikos saw that some fishermen were too afraid to take their boats out. Without fresh fish, the market had little to sell. Nikos and a few brave fishermen decided to go together. We are careful. We know the sea, Nikos told them. If we don't fish, how will the people eat? So they sailed out in small groups, watching the water closely. When they returned, they shared their catch with those in need. Meanwhile, at the town square, young people gathered to help the elderly. They carried water and food to those who could not go to the market. Some helped to fix broken walls and clean the streets after small tremors. Others comforted children, telling them stories to keep them calm. Dr. Andreas and his team continued to study the island. He spoke on the local radio, updating the people. We do not know what will happen next, he said honestly. But we must stay ready and help one another. Even the tourists who had stayed on the island joined in. A group of them helped organize supplies, carrying boxes of food and medicine to a safe storage area. The people of Santorini were afraid, but they were not alone. In this time of crisis, they found strength in each other. No one could stop the earth from shaking, but kindness, courage, and unity could keep their spirits strong. One morning, Eleni woke up and listened carefully. For the first time in weeks, the ground was still. No shaking, no strange noises from the earth. Just the sound of waves gently touching the shore and birds singing outside her window. The tremors had stopped. News spread quickly across the island. People stepped out of their homes looking around as if expecting another shake, but it never came. The earth was calm again. The danger seemed to have passed. At the harbor, Nikos and the fishermen smiled as they prepared their boats. Time to fish without worrying about the sea moving on its own, one of them joked. The market reopened, and the streets became lively once more. Families who had left the island slowly returned. The ferries arrived, bringing back people who had feared they might never see their homes again. When Maria's son stepped off the boat and ran to hug her, she cried with happiness. But things were not the same as before. The people of Santorini had changed. They had felt the power of nature and the fear of losing everything. Now, they understood that they must always be ready. The mayor, Mr. Papadakis, and Dr. Andreas worked together to create a plan. They built stronger shelters, improved emergency systems, and taught people what to do if the island shook again. Schools held lessons about earthquakes, teaching children how to stay safe. The community also became closer. People checked on their neighbors more often. Friends and families shared meals and stories, remembering how they had helped each other during the hardest times. One evening, as the sun set over the sea, Eleni sat outside her house drinking coffee. She watched the sky turn orange and pink, just as it always had. The island is strong, she whispered to herself. And so are we. Santorini had faced the shaking earth and survived. The island was peaceful once again, but its people would never forget the lessons they had learned.